Hello, my name is Carol McCoy. I am the interviewer today of Darryl Townsend. It is March 7th, 2022 at the Nashville Bar headquarters at 150th 4th Avenue North, Nashville, Tennessee. This interview is being conducted for the Legal History Project of the Tennessee Bar Foundation and the Nashville Bar Foundation. Darryl, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to interview you, and I will ask you to please state your full name, date, and place of birth.
Carol, it's a pleasure to be here with you and an honor as well. Darryl Gene Townsend. I was born November 2, 1951. Was there more information you asked for?
Not yet,
Okay.
but I will. And we're going to start off by going through your birth family. And if you would kindly tell me the names and what little bit you know about your paternal and maternal grandparents, their names.
My paternal grandparents were Carl and May Townsend. I don't know their birth dates, actually. They were born and raised in Western Kentucky, in Western County, Kentucky. And my maternal grandparents were also born and raised in Webster County. And they were Odie Johnson and his wife, Myrtle Head Johnson.
All right. Your father, if you would please tell me his name, where he was born, birth date, and then we'll go on a little bit more.
My dad was born in Webster County, Kentucky. Harold Doris Townsend. His birth date was September 12, 1922. And my mother, Dorothy Catherine Johnson Townsend, was born May 28, 1920 in Webster County, Kentucky.
Now, you told me a little bit earlier about your dad and what he did, and I'd like you to share that with those that are listening.
Well, my dad was one of the younger of several children. Life on a farm in Webster County is the way that he grew up. And he went to public schools in Webster County, graduated from high school. Probably would have spent his life farming and living in the area were it not for World War II, which took him out to see the world. And upon discharge in 1945, he and my mother moved to Evansville, Indiana.
And what did he do occupational wise after World War II?
He took jobs in factories, a Serval plant in Evansville, and it got him started on his work career. From there, he worked for several years as a jewelty route salesman, something that is foreign to us now, but he actually literally drove a truck around a delivery route, sold groceries and delivered them to people in the Evansville and southern Indiana area, and did that primarily until I guess it was 1958 that he and my mother bought a restaurant in downtown Evansville. Worked at that restaurant for several years.
And that's a very interesting story because you were about 5, 6, 7.
Yeah, 67 years old.
And in the beginning, where did you all live?
When I was born, we were living in an old farmhouse on the outskirts of Evansville. And when they bought the restaurant, it was located downtown. And so they actually moved to an apartment above the restaurant where we lived for 2 or 3 years before we moved. And that was obviously convenient for them if they were working a restaurant and literally open 24/7. And then after a couple of years, we moved back to I guess it could be generously called the Evansville suburb. And they actually took a small piece of land off of the old farmhouse that they had been living in, and built their own house, built a new house that's primarily where I grew up. We moved into that house in 1961, so most of my memories are related to that house.
Well, I wanted to ask you too about your father's community and political activities. I think you said that your family was very church oriented.
Yes.
And what role did you or your parents play in that regard in the community?
Well, my parents worked hard and worked long hours, and so there was not a lot of time available for purely social activities. They were devoutly religious, so their social life, in large part, revolved around the church. For all of my childhood, we were members at a Southern Baptist church in Evansville, Calvary Baptist Church. My father was active, was a deacon in that church. My mother was active in what might be called women's auxiliary activities, and that was truly the focus of the social life of the family.
And the family consisted not only of you, but who else?
I have an older brother and an older sister. My brother is 6 years my senior, and my sister is 4 years my senior.
And their names are?
Kenny Edward Townsend and Trina Jeanette Townsend, married name Himmel.
And where do they live right now?
Kenny and his family live in Indianapolis, and Trina and her family live in Milwaukee, in a Milwaukee suburb.
You talked about your early memories. What do you recall about Baker Elementary?
Well, Baker Elementary is where I went to elementary school for about 2 years. When, as I said, when my family moved downtown because of the restaurant, Baker Elementary was literally across the street and down the block from where the restaurant was located and where we lived. So first through third grades, I guess, were at Baker Elementary.
And then where did you go?
When we moved back to the burbs, Kay's Elementary was my school, and that's where I attended 4th through 8th grades.
I understand that you walked to school those first grade, second grade or so.
Sure.
After that, you start riding a bus.
For the most part, yeah.
And what were some of your favorite classes in elementary through like 8th grade?
I always enjoyed my history classes, anything related to social sciences, geography, that sort of thing. English, I was never, I guess I was reasonably adept at math, but it was never one of my favorite topics.
And do you recall any teachers that were your favorites?
Yeah, I sure do. As a matter of fact, the history social studies teacher, a fellow by the name of Don Marlowe, was a great teacher and very inspirational and likable guy in particular. Yeah.
Early in these years, I asked you what activities you participated in.
Mm-hmm.
And you told me some baseball, some basketball, some football, but you also played in the school band.
I did.
What did you play?
Well, you can't have a good band without a tuba sousaphone section, right? Somebody's got to lay down those bass lines. So our school band had a sousaphone and a tuba. I handled the tuba, and another guy handled the sousaphone.
So what happened? And I asked you about family trips. You said you didn't take many while you were growing up, but there was a big family trip. And where was that?
Well, when my parents, after about 5 years in the restaurant business, gave it up, sold the business, and before starting on something new, the whole family took really a great vacation, about 3 weeks, and traveled by automobile all throughout the Western United States, camping for the most part. We had a big old boat of a car, a 1960 Buick that would handle a luggage rack on top. And so we kept our tent and camping supplies and that sort of thing up there, and literally just drove from one spot to another, and typically would camp out in national parks.
In addition to the tuba and these other things that you did at school, what were some of your either hobbies or what did you like to read at that time?
Well, I just love to read from an early age. Even when we were living downtown, there was a library, I don't know, probably 7 or 8 blocks from where we were living in that apartment. It was a Willard Library. It's one of those thousands of libraries around the country that were built with grants from the from Andrew Carnegie. So a great old Gothic style building. And I would ride my bike down there, sit for hours and read, check out books and bring them home and read. And so, you know, that's just something that I always enjoyed doing. As a matter of fact, one of my high school buddies ended up being on the board of Willard Library and solicited some funds. So I've contributed something to the Willard Library over the past few years, and partial repayment for all that it did for me 60 years ago.
Excellent. Do you know enough about the Carnegie libraries that were spread out across the United States?
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Well, Andrew Carnegie, you know, was made millions in the steel industry, and his goal in giving back was literacy. So his, I don't know whether he personally or his foundation, literally gave the money to build thousands of libraries across the United States. One is here in East Nashville, still functioning, I think, as a library.
I think you're right.
Yeah, and you know they're built like fortresses, so they ought to last forever. Yeah,
that's right. So after you went through elementary school, which at the time was 1 to 8.
Yeah, K through 8. Yeah.
So that's the way I think of traditional schooling, without these middle and junior highs and everything. Where did you go next?
The Harrison High School. Harrison High School, like a lot of cities with baby boomer generation flooding the public schools, there were a lot of schools being built at the time. So Harrison High School was built in the early 60s. I think 63 was its first year in operation. My older brother was in the first graduating class from Harrison High School, and then my time came 1966, I suppose it was. So that's where I did my 9th through 12th grades.
And you graduated when?
1969.
During the time that you were in high school, do you have any teachers that you recall that were memorable, were important in your education?
Yeah. Well, again, since I always have loved language and reading and literature, I remember particularly Mrs. Winter, who was a fantastic teacher in all things in the English department. Took a couple of courses from her. One in particular, I remember a great course was just titled Word Power. And the whole focus of the semester-long course was words, just learning, derivations, Greek, Roman, Greek or Latin derivations or whatever, vocabulary building, learning synonyms and homonyms and all that sort of thing. So that was a great course. I loved it. And even though, as I said, I wasn't much on math, I remember having one great math teachers just for geometry. That's the one math subject that I could always kind of focus on and understand, because it's it's sitting there in front of you and you can actually see what you're figuring on. And Ms. Voth was a fantastic teacher.
Ms. Voth?
Voth, V-O-T-H. Yeah.
Okay.
Very well.
Now, you said your family was kind of church oriented. You're still in high school.
Mhm.
You told me you sang in the youth choir.
I did, yeah.
And so do you continue on doing that?
Oh, no. When you get a little older, they have a way of culling out the people that have no talent.
While you were in high school, what summer jobs did you have?
I remember the very first summer job I had as a sack boy at a local grocery, the Great Scott Grocery, making minimum wage $1.60 per hour at the time. It was a good job. I believe that was.
Sounded like a lot of money then.
It was good money, especially if you were able to get some overtime. And Yeah, I think that was after my sophomore year, before my junior year.
What happened your junior year summer?
Junior year, I
Maybe-
think I went back there. Yeah,
Okay,
I think.
and I think you're right, but between your junior and your senior year,
Oh, between my junior and my senior year, I had a great experience. Indiana University at that time had a program, had good foreign language departments, and so would have a sort of a statewide competition to send 30 students to Germany, 30 to Spain, and 30 to France to study primarily the language, but also the culture or whatever, and live with families in those respective countries. So I was fortunate enough to be one of the 30 people selected to go to Germany. I had by that time 3 years of high school German, and credit the fact that I had some fluency to another great teacher, Miss Dusner. I remember Miss Dusner very well. But in any event, statewide competition, if you get selected, you get to go at no expense and spend the summer in the case of Germany, it was a city in the Ruhr region, Krefeld, and lived with a family there and had just a fantastic experience.
did you become conversational in
Yeah,
German?
definitely.
Do you retain any of it?
I retain enough that on the couple of occasions that my wife Debbie and I have been to Europe, I've been able to get us around Germany.
Well, high school comes to an end, and what did you decide to do?
Well, it was just sort of given that you'd go to college. My brother and my sister both went to and graduated from college. We were the first people in my family to do that. Yeah, it was just a given, apply to college and go to college.
How did you choose where you wanted to go?
Yeah, well, I wanted to go somewhere that I knew I would get a good education, but I didn't have, tremendous wanderlust. I didn't want to go too far away. Evansville is right down in the southwest corner of the state. From Evansville to Nashville and Vanderbilt, it's only now less than a 3-hour drive. At that time, about a 3-hour drive. So Vanderbilt was probably my number one choice, and my only other place that I applied was Indiana University, and pretty much a sure thing to get accepted there. But I was also accepted at Vanderbilt, so that's where I came for my undergraduate.
And having made that decision, when did you start at Vanderbilt?
Fall 1973.
And I want to be certain, did you have any military service at that time or later?
None.
Okay. So you decided to go to Vanderbilt. What was your major?
My major was political science.
And why so?
As I said earlier, I just always had an interest in the social sciences generally. At that time, it was a time that our country was undergoing a lot of change, a lot of political activity, student dissent, that sort of thing. And I thought that I might like to take a career that would involve politics, and so that was primarily what my thinking was.
Do you recall what the tuition was?
Carol, if I'm not mistaken, it was $1,800. That number sticks in my
I
mind.
think you're right.
Would that be per semester or per year?
Per year.
Per year, okay.
I believe you're right.
It's
Gone up a bit.
It involves some sacrifice on my parents' part.
And that's what I was going to lead to that.
Yeah.
How did you manage to pay for college?
Well, my parents told each of us children that, that they wanted us to go to college and that they would foot the bill for 4 years. So you had 4 years to get it done. And to have some skin in the game, you buy your own books. So the long and short of it is that that tuition was met by my parents with some scholarship help from Vanderbilt. And I footed the bill for the books, and they kept me in food and clothing, and paid my room and board, and that's what got me through 4 years at Vanderbilt.
You did tell me that you lived in Kissam Quad, which may or may not exist
It
anymore
no longer exists.
on Vanderbilt, and you made a few friends there. Do you recall
Sure.
some of your good friends from college?
Sure. In fact, one of my best friends, a fellow named Kyle Carpenter, is still one of my best friends, and he's a lawyer practicing in Knoxville. We happened to be on the same floor of our freshman dorm, so we got to know each other well. And later, we were members of the same fraternity, and so we remained friends for years.
And I think you mentioned Wolf McLean.
That's where he's practicing.
Oh, sorry, that's the
Yeah.
name of the firm.
Yeah, that's where he practices in Knoxville.
All right.
You stumped me for a second there, because I did have another good friend named McLean, but his first name was not Wolf. So.
I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
Having enrolled and decided you're gonna go forward, do you recall any of your favorite professors?
Yeah, I had, again, majoring in political science. One of my favorites was a guy named Ben Walter. Took a couple of courses from him. Professor Anaptawi, I remember being a guy that I enjoyed. Richard Pride, who was a youngish guy as a professor at the time. His specialty was polling and that sort of thing, and I enjoyed.
Voter behavior,
Yep.
something like that.
Yep.
And I think you also mentioned Harry Howell Ransom.
Yeah. Yep.
That's, he
He was-
studied presidential
Yeah,
politics.
and he was chair of the department at that
What did you like about your days at Vanderbilt?
time. I liked a lot of the courses. A lot of them I didn't care for. I liked my relationships with friends. Made a lot of good friends. Had a lot of good times. After my freshman year, beginning my sophomore year, a lot of my social life was centered around the fraternity. I was a Kappa Sig, and
Like my son.
yeah. And so those are some of my fond
And you
memories.
became very active in the fraternity, is that right?
Well, I was an officer for 1 year at Vanderbilt. The living arrangements are fraternity houses are as residences. They're very small. The only people that live in the houses are the officers. So for my junior year, I was an officer. So I actually lived in the house along with 5 other guys. Yeah. So,
You're going to college while the Vietnam War is going on,
mhm.
and most young men had to get a draft number. How did that work?
Well, I got one, and
Based on your birthday, right?
well, it was just a random draw.
Oh.
Every male with a birth date in a certain year would have his birthday drawn at random, literally out of a big bin, I guess. And so the night on which those draws would take place were always big nights. I can't remember, and you know, if you had a low number, the chances were you were going to get drafted, and if you had a high number, chances were that you wouldn't. And I can't remember exactly what my number was, but it was way on up there in the 200s or so.
I did ask you about the military, but I didn't ask you about what you did during the summers when you were in college.
I did some factory work back in Evansville. Evansville was a big whirlpool town at the time, and they were always looking for summer employees. So I did some piece work 1 year at a drill press. I did some assembly line work 1 year, and then 1 year a good friend of mine from high school started his own house painting business. So he was the owner of this jackleg operation. I was one of his employees, and we painted houses for the summer.
This is an unusual question, but what did you learn from those jobs, of those variety of jobs, that you felt helped you later in life?
Well, I learned, I think I already knew it, but it was reinforced for me, the value of hard work and the belief that a person who makes his living with his hands is entitled to the same respect as somebody that uses his brain. Just because you're a blue collar worker doesn't mean that you're not productive and you're not essential to making life good for the rest of us and making our society, our country function.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How would you describe your study habits during college?
Erratic. I didn't apply myself terribly well. I will say my freshman year, I probably did, and that might have been as much a matter of fear. This is her phone, isn't it?
I have no idea.
I think she left it
Just
on.
turn that. Thank you. That musical interlude was brought to you courtesy of a rogue phone.
Freshman year,
You studied.
I studied, and
Then you joined the
and
fraternity.
then I joined. the
And like a
fraternity.
lot of people had more fun in the fraternity than you were in
I
classes.
did, although I still managed to do well enough academically, but it was I did not apply myself terribly well. It was largely a part of or a function of cramming for final exams and writing term papers at the last minute and pulling all-nighters, something that a lot of people are familiar with, I believe.
Well, as a political science major, how did the events in the early 70s affect your views of politics or the economy or social issues?
I think they probably played a role in making me somewhat cynical about politics. I mean, Watergate was the big story of, I guess it was summer of 73, maybe. Yeah, anyway, but certainly the lies, the self-dealing by people that we all put our trust in turned me into something of a cynic about the political scene.
How did you reconcile that in regards to your interests as a political science major?
Well, I guess it came to the point where political science was more interesting to me as an abstract topic and not something that I wanted to devote my life to.
Graduation arrives, and what did you decide to do after you finished your college education?
I was very undecided. I think that was reasonably typical of people of my generation. I felt like I wanted to do something that would be something that would contribute to our society. I'm not claiming to be a martyr or particularly altruistic or anything, but I just wanted to do something that I would feel good about contributing. And so I decided to try to become a policeman and applied right at the end of my senior year with Metro Nashville Police Department. Over the course of that summer, after I graduated, did all the interviews and tests and so forth, and was accepted and went to the police academy in the fall of 1973.
How long were you a police officer?
I was only there for a year.
What did you do as a police officer?
I was your prototypical patrol officer, and I just at that time the Metro Police rode two men. It was almost always men, two persons, I should say, but it was in my case always two men to a car during the second and third shifts, and so I was typically the rookie officer along with an older officer just riding and patrolling our zone. My zone usually was from roughly Woodmont Boulevard south to the county line and Franklin Road over to about Hillsborough Road.
Pretty low crime area.
Not a whole lot of violent crime. not a whole lot of
What's the most memorable experience you had?
I don't think you asked me that question earlier,
Yeah, this is a
Carol.
surprise.
Okay, here's the impromptu. We got a call to do a potential break-in at a house in our zone, and a pretty well-to-do suburban area was my zone. And so we were called to one of the larger houses of one of the more prominent Nashvilleians and told that a break-in had occurred. We drove up, it was late, I don't know, midnight or so, and surveyed the area, had a couple of other cars come with us, couldn't find anything, and announced ourselves, shouted, tried to get attention. Nobody responded, and then the rookie, the young guy on the scene, just happened to look up in this third-story window and see a face at the window. So I alerted my partner, and we decided we needed to go in. So we forced our way into the house, walked all throughout the house, turning on lights and identifying ourselves, and got no response until we came to one door at the end of a long hallway that was locked. We knocked and no response whatsoever. And I decided, well, okay, we just clear out. So we're walking back down the hallway. I'm the last man leaving the scene when I hear the door opening behind me. I proceeded to draw my weapon. The only time I did as a Metro police officer, draw my weapon and level down on a guy who turned out to be the occupant of the house. An old guy, and if I called his name, you'd recognize it. He had, when he saw all the cars show up, he got scared himself and had locked himself in his bedroom and was just coming out when I leveled my .38 revolver on him. So that was my one time to draw my weapon with a purpose, and fortunately.
And the reason I popped that question on you is because you said you stayed a year.
Yeah.
Maybe there wasn't enough excitement for you.
Well, that's true. I think there were probably two main reasons that I didn't stay longer, Carol. Number one was, in order, at that time anyway, in order to really get to a position where you were doing something that was challenging, you had to stay for 4 or 5 years and just do your time at patrol. If you wanted to get into undercover work or detective work, any of those sort of exciting areas. So that was one thing. And the other thing was, I just, as I said, my motive for going was to try to do something worthwhile, and I just did not feel that I was doing something worthwhile.
So what did you do?
So I applied to law school and was accepted at Vanderbilt.
Once again,
Off to Vanderbilt.
okay.
I'm
Now,
sure the tuition had gone up by that time. I can't recall exactly what it was.
What were your first days like at Vanderbilt? You have to start the classes. What's it like?
It was not what I had expected, and the only higher education exposure I had was 4 years at Vanderbilt, and as I mentioned, you could pretty well coast your way through. It became pretty obvious early on in law school that wasn't the case, and you had to apply yourself diligently and consistently, and it wasn't anything where you could cut courses, cut classes, and cram for a night before a final exam and expect to do well. That was driven home pretty quickly.
Now, you had mentioned that the tuition probably gone up.
Mm-hmm.
How did you finance?
Well, again, Vanderbilt and the federal government both helped me out. I had scholarship assistance from Vanderbilt. I had national direct student loans. And then I also worked pretty consistently. I absolutely, totally lucked into a great job. But that what is now the TSU downtown campus was at that time University of Tennessee Extension, UT Nashville. And most of the administrative people were there during the day, but most of the classes took place during the evening. So the administrative office needed somebody to be physically present during the evening hours, largely just to be able to respond if there were questions, issues, emergencies, whatever. So I literally lucked into this job titled evening administrator. I worked 5:30 to 10:30 every night. By 7 to 8 o'clock every night, things were so quiet that I could just sit at a desk and study or goof off or whatever I wanted to do. And made what at the time was some pretty good money for doing so. So that got me through law school.
And when you say group up, I was thinking about what you said about your study habits in college.
Mhm.
Did you do much goofing off, or did you have to study?
No, I did a better job, I think, especially after the shock of the first semester. When, like I say, I realized that you really did have to apply yourself and keep up on a day-to-day basis with your courses. And
Who were some of your favorite professors?
oh, Bob Covington was one of my favorites. I missed out on John Wade as a torts professor our first semester. He was off on a sabbatical, I believe. And so Bob Covington, or the Cub as he was affectionately known, took over that course and did a good job standing in. And then I also took an insurance law course that Bob taught. It was great. He made it fun. And at that time, by the time the second, third year came around, I was also doing some clerking work at Howell and Fisher, and a lot of what we did was insurance related. So I knew a little bit of the stuff when I went into the course, and it was naturally interesting to me. So I did pretty well on that.
And that's what I was going to ask. What did you do during the summers? You're clerking at Howell and Fisher. How did that come about?
Right at the end of first year, I got a call from a classmate of mine, John Drake, and John had been clerking during the year at Howell and Fisher. And at that point, I guess this would be summer of 75. John Branham, my great friend and mentor, had just taken a position at Howell and Fisher and had taken on one very large case that he needed somebody to do not just legal research, but some good footwork and fact investigation, that sort of thing. John Drake, who was clerking there at the time, said, well, there's this guy in my class who's a former cop. Sounds like he'd be good for the job. John Drake referred me to John Branham. John Branham hired me and to work on that one case. And it evolved into a part-time clerking position more generally at Howell and Fisher.
In addition to that friend, who were some of your other good friends that you made in law school?
So this is going to be publicized like to Nashville bar members?
The world will know.
I don't know if
You have
Bill,
to name names.
I don't know if Bill O'Brien would appreciate me naming him.
Well, I'm sorry, Bill.
Anyway.
It slipped out.
Bill, I don't think I shared this earlier, but coincidentally, Bill grew up in Evansville with me, was 1 year behind me in school, but the same age for purposes of sports activities. He and I played on the same Little League baseball team. I was the shortstop, he was the third baseman. And then we went our separate ways. We went to different high schools. He went to Wabash College, I went to Vanderbilt. And then, I can't remember what I was doing, but at some law school function first year, I thought that guy sure looks familiar. And it was my old third baseman, Bill O'Brien.
That kind of a reunion is memorable and wonderful.
Yeah. So we renewed that friendship. So, Gary Rubenstein, Nashville lawyer, has been a lifelong friend since law school. Jim Keever, Chris Harris, were very close friends at the time and still are.
And I think you mentioned a lawyer that retired, David Russell.
Yeah, David Russell.
And a woman.
Did I?
Mary Shepard.
Yeah. Well, Mary and I weren't really close in law school.
I see.
But Mary, after clerking for a couple of years after graduation, joined Howell and Fisher, and we really became close then, whereas we were not in law school. Mary was always intellectually superior to me. So, she was part of a group in law school that, my brains just didn't qualify.
What were some of, besides the insurance class that you took with Bob Covington, what were some of the other areas of the law that you found interesting while you were there?
It's kind of funny. There was a land use planning course that I found very interesting. I've never applied it in my practice. I will say never. I have not applied it very much in my practice. But it was taught by a visiting professor, a guy named Don Large. He made it very interesting. Totally enjoyed it. I liked, and again, I've not done anything with it in my practice, but I liked basic federal income tax, which is level 100 tax course. Jim O'Hare taught that. I enjoyed it.
What is your assessment of the value of your law school and its curriculum?
I'd give it a C average, a grade, I guess.
Tell people who are listening what the curriculum was like at the time that you started, because I think it's changed a lot.
Well, your entire first year was set. I mean, there was a pattern. There was a 1-year contract course. There was, I guess it was a 4-year torts course, a con law course. I mean, all of the courses were
Basic
established.
courses.
Yeah, your basic
Real
courses.
property.
Yeah, your property course. And so, I mean, there was civil procedure. And so that was,
Criminal
semester
law.
1 is laid out for you. Semester 2 is laid out for you. So, no electives, no nothing. You just, that's what you did. And then beyond that, basically, you could choose electives as wanted.
Who was the dean at that time?
Bob Knaus, and he wasn't there very long. And I want to say by 3rd year, maybe he had left and Dent Bostic had taken over. I may be wrong about that. But
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I left a little earlier than that. But how did you feel the law school prepared you for what you were going to do in the future?
yeah, like I said, I can't say that I was ill prepared, but I think I could have been better prepared in the sense of the nuts and bolts of the practice of law, especially the private practice of law. And, and it's difficult for a law school to prepare everybody for what they're going to be doing vocationally, because people are going to be going different places, private practice, government practice, criminal, civil.
And
et
how were
cetera.
you leaning? What kind of practice were you inclined to seek?
I figured that I would be a trial lawyer. My years exposure to the criminal system when I was a police officer turned me off to that. And then I took a job clerking with a law firm that did nothing but civil trial practice. So I kind of naturally fell into it, but that's what I anticipated I probably would anyway. But we didn't have any lawyers in the family. I didn't know any lawyers growing up. So to me, a lawyer just meant somebody that tries cases.
That's what it meant.
Yeah.
I want to segue at this point back to your personal life. You're busy, you're working at night, you're going to law school, you have a summer clerkship, but what was your personal life like?
Well, I was dating steadily, and then engaged to, and then married to my present wife, my once and present and future and forever wife.
Your first bride.
Yeah, Debbie Ewing Townsend. So that's what my social life centered around, law school, social events, and then having a regular.
When did you all get married?
You didn't have to do that to me, Carol.
I'm so sorry.
June 6th, 1976.
That's to test, because I think Debbie will probably look at this. And as is true with a lot of marriages, there are other products that come about.
There are. In my case, we were blessed with 2 wonderful products. My older daughter, Elizabeth, was born on November 13, 1981, Friday the 13th. And our younger daughter, Sarah, was born on November 17, 1984.
And where are they now?
Elizabeth is in New Orleans, and she is the middle school administrator at the Isidore Newman School there. Married to Brandon Ecker, who is a CrossFit trainer and manager of a local facility. They have one child, Reed, who will turn 9 in July. And Sarah is in Memphis. And she is working for a PR firm that is headquartered out of New York City. Just started that job a couple of months ago. And she is married to John Leach, who up until recently was an Episcopal priest and now has made a change in his life career and is starting in the insurance industry.
And do they have any little ones?
Yes, they have Poppy, age 3, and Ann Townsend, age 2.
It sounds to me like you will be making a lot of trips to New Orleans and Memphis.
Just got back yesterday, day before yesterday, from one to New Orleans, where we took care of Reed for a few days while his parents took a trip of their own. And yeah, we burned up I-40 to Memphis.
We're getting to the end of law school. We got you married. We don't have any children yet.
Okay.
What was the bar exam prep like, and taking the bar exam, what was that like?
Well, I took the Crossley bar exam, bar review course, I'm sorry, over the summer of 1977, I guess it was, at the UT Nashville facility. And it was extremely productive. I mean, I felt like that just really prepared me to nail anything as far as bar exam was concerned. I always say, and other people have said it as well, that at the day that the bar exam is taken, you know more law than you'll ever know for the rest of your life. So that was my main preparation. That, as well as studying with some friends. And I don't recall exactly when the bar was given, but I was admitted. I was passed and was admitted on October 12 of 1977.
One of the things that I found enviable is that you had a career path before you actually took the bar exam. Most people are on pins and needles about where they're going to go and will they get in.
Yeah.
What was your future looking like at that point?
Well, my time clerking at Howell and Fisher had convinced me that I liked those people, and they must have liked me because they offered me a position. So once I got my license, I just fell right into an associate role there.
You mentioned that you had started at Howell and Fisher while you were in law school, doing some legwork for John Brown. Did that have anything to do with a fire at a funeral home?
It did. That was the whole reason I mentioned that he had one big case that he needed some legwork on. And the case was, there was at the time a Nashville funeral home, Pettis Owen Wood, out on Charlotte Avenue. And they, things are so, as we look back on them, they seem to be so crude. But the county and the city would actually contract with funeral homes if they had deaths in the river to go out and drag the river with grappling hooks in hopes of picking up the dead bodies. And Pettis Owen Wood had a small houseboat that they used for that purpose. And they kept it at the Commodore Yacht Club on the river. And one day in 1973, their houseboat caught fire while it was at the dock. It proceeded to catch virtually every other boat that was stored there on fire. And so 40 some odd boats were either extensively damaged or sunk. A couple of slips were damaged. And so it was a big case. And that's why John hired me. And learned a little bit of admiralty law, actually, doing that.
How long did it take for that case to get wrapped up?
A couple of 3 years.
So you probably worked on it.
Oh, I did.
For a while.
I mean, that was the reason that I was hired, and it kept me busy, and
So your job search was very, very small.
it really was. Yeah.
And what was the firm size and who was there when you first went?
When I started, there were 4 lawyers, and I became the 5th. And it was Morton Howell, Doug Fisher, John Branham, and Phil North. And Johnny Harwell had been there shortly for several years before that, but he had left shortly before I started. And Phil North was licensed a year before me, so he had been there for just about a year whenever I started in October of '77.
Do you recall what your starting salary was?
I want to say it was right at $12,000. I want to think I was making like right at $1,000 a month. I thought I was doing pretty good.
Was that comparable to what other firms were paying?
Yeah. I think pretty much all the Nashville firms at that time were in the $10,000 to $15,000 range.
What were some of the first cases that you were given or that you undertook?
Well, starting out as an associate, I did whatever I was asked to do, obviously, or told to do. And that would involve doing grunt work on cases.
Give me a definition of grunt work, because I know what you're talking about, but I don't think young lawyers or lawyers in the last 20 years really understand what grunt work. Maybe they have a different definition.
Maybe so. Doing the routine pleadings. In our case, it was predominantly defense work. So, preparing answers, cross claims, that sort of thing. Doing the discovery, propounding discovery, answering written discovery, producing documents, and doing whatever research is required, obviously. So limited client contact, limited responsibility in terms of things that could actually fatally impair a case. And then as you show yourself capable of doing those things, you take on more responsibility.
And who were some of the clients, the big clients that you all represented?
Well, our practice at that time was built around insurance defense work. And so we got referrals of cases from Travelers, Aetna, St. Paul, primarily the larger insurance companies. And of course, that doesn't mean that they were your clients. They just refer you the matter, and your client is whoever those companies insured. So it could be anybody from a mom and pop business or an individual, who's involved in an auto wreck, to a multinational corporation.
What was your daily routine like for the first 5-8 years that you're there?
Very steady in terms of my hours. I'd be there at 8 to 8:30 every day. Put in a full day till 5 o'clock or so. Unusual, but certainly not unprecedented to have to work the late hours on a project that had a deadline or that came up suddenly. But it was not a practice that it killed you with 80 or 90 or 100-hour work weeks like a lot of my friends who had gone off to.
That's what I was going to ask. You hear a lot of stories about billable hours and how many billable hours you needed. What was that atmosphere like at Howell and Fisher?
I never felt any pressure at all to bill a certain number of hours. I think it's a testament to the trust that all of those lawyers at that firm at that time had with one another. Is, if you're given an assignment, devote the time that's necessary to do it. And it was rare really that I would bill 200 hours in a month. It was rare that I would bill 100 hours in a month, but there were times that I did on either extreme.
I want to take a little different tact on the next set of questions, but they have to do with individuals that were there when you first started. You talked about Morty Howell. How would you describe him and his way of working as a lawyer? He was more senior, is that right?
Yeah.
What age was he when you first started?
Let me do some quick calculations. When I started, Mo was in his late 50s.
Okay.
He seemed old to me, and now that doesn't seem old at all.
And that's one point I want to make. And what was he like?
He was a great guy, a gracious guy, a generous guy with his time and with his advice, and had a type of practice that was different from everybody else in the firm. His practice was business oriented, small businesses, estate work. He was not a trial lawyer, so he was kind of off to the side. And I got to work with him a lot for my first few years, and so I enjoyed that, and I enjoyed that exposure. But what I wanted to do was trial work, and so it was a different type of practice.
Was there a time when he was the mayor of Belmead?
Yes, he was.
Now,
When I was there.
Belmead is a part of Nashville, in the metropolitan arena, that is allowed to have its own elected officials, so to
Right.
speak, and they have really their own little government. My recollection is that Morty was kind of a Southern gentleman.
Absolutely.
Did you ever have anything to do with Belmead and any of the work that he did for them?
I did a few little piecemeal things, like as mayor, if he had a question about a particular, legislative issue or something like that, he might ask me to look at it. But it was very limited. That was volunteer work on his part.
That's what I was thinking. It's an
Yeah.
unpaid position, right?
Yeah.
Doug Fisher was the next in line. And what was he like? And how old was he?
Doug, again, at the time that I came, was 50 roughly. Doug was born in 1927. And he was, I think you can uniformly get consensus that he was one of the great trial lawyers in Nashville, or in the state even at the time, had already developed that reputation. So it was great to get exposure to him and to learn from him.
Let me ask you, based on what you just said about a great trial lawyer, what were the characteristics of a great trial lawyer that you saw he displayed?
Hard work, thorough knowledge of every case that you're working on, knowledge of the facts, knowledge of the law, knowledge of how one applies to the other, strategic thinking and planning, and if you actually get down to trial, copious preparation.
Did you interact with him very much?
Yeah.
And what are some of your memories of working with Doug Fisher?
Well, I remember the compliments because they meant so much to me.
What did he say?
He said, "Great job." He said, I remember a particular case, an insurance dispute that we were involved in, and I credit Bob Covington. I remember there were some notions from that insurance law course that I was able to apply to the case. It gave us a real good defense, and we were able to get out of that case paying a nominal amount of money. And I think that my ideas really contributed to that. And he was just generous in his praise of what I had done. And he didn't try to take the credit for himself. He shared it with the other lawyers, shared my involvement with the other lawyers who were involved in the case, with the client. Doug had, as every good trial lawyer has to have, I believe, an ego. You have to feel that you're capable and confident of doing the things that you're asked to do. But he also had a very generous approach to sharing credit for wherever it belonged.
Well, like Morty Howell, he had some political connections, did he not?
Before he and Moat started Howell and Fisher, he was very much a political animal. He was he was drawn to Frank Clement, governor from, I think, 3 terms in Tennessee in the 1950s. And so became Clement's really right-hand man, legislative liaison, just a kind of a one-man kitchen cabinet, I would say, to Frank Clement. Now, that was well before my time, but he was very connected in the Democratic Party in the 50s and 60s. And then when he decided to leave that, he made a full break from it. He shared with me, and I don't think he shared it in confidence with anybody. But when he left the state government, he cashed out his state pension plan 100%. He could have, continued with it, but he didn't want there to be any incentive for him to ever go back to government work. So he cashed it out, swore it off, and was, for the most part, a non-political animal after that.
Now, John Branham was the lawyer that was your first contact in this firm. How would you describe him and your relationship with him?
Well, John is, he was my #1 mentor. And
I should ask, how old was he at the time?
Okay, again, 77, so he was 37 years old when I started, when I got licensed.
Less than 10 years older than you.
10 years almost to the day.
Okay.
We're both November birthdays. Mine's 1951 and his is 1941. John was, as I say, my #1 mentor. As an associate, I spent more time with him than with any of the other partners. He taught me immense amounts. He's also, I think, uniformly recognized as one of Nashville's great trial lawyers. His personality is different from that of Doug Fisher. He's much more emotional and engaged in the trial of a case or in deposition taking or whatever, but much more outgoing, gregarious. But the same principles that, I think make Doug so great also apply to John: preparation, hard work, careful thought, and planning.
There was one other person. Oh, Phil North, you said. Was he there when you came on?
Phil was there.
Not Johnny Howell.
Johnny Harwell
Harwell
had left.
Had left.
Mhm.
Tell me about Phil North.
Phil and I were more.
Is he the same age thereabouts?
Yeah, Phil's just a year or 2 years older than I am. And so we really didn't work together that much. Phil was more involved in building his own part of the practice and doing his own thing. And then Phil left. And a great thing about Howell and Fisher over the years is we've always had these partnership arrangements or LLC arrangements that allow people to leave on very amicable terms. And Phil left in, I guess it was 83, I want to say. Again, very amiably started his own firm. John Branham left a few years after that. Again, no hard feelings.
How many lawyers are there now?
I think we're at 15 now.
One of my observations about the practice of law in Nashville is that law firms seem to have their own personalities. I don't know how it happens, but the nature of the law firm seems to become permeated through all the partners or all the associates. And Howell and Fisher, how would you describe the practice there and the personality of the law firm?
Well, I would like to think that we're perceived of as quality, and I hope that we are quality. I like to think that we're reviewed as efficient or economical, shall I say. That's, and insurance companies have continued to be our bread and butter, and that's what they're looking for in the practice of law. It's a cost item. And so they want to know that they're getting a good product at a reasonable price, and we have always felt that that's one thing that we want to and do deliver.
Well, as an editorial comment, I would say I agree. But you have a very fine reputation in the legal community and in the city as a general comment.
Thank you.
Did you develop a specialty while you were there?
Over the years, yeah, I guess I did. And it just kind of evolved naturally. When I started, it was rare for there to be a lawsuit against a medical malpractice lawsuit. You didn't sue your doctors, didn't sue your hospital. Same thing could be said about lawyers. And then that has progressively changed over the decades. And so as professional liability cases became more common, and insurers were looking for lawyers to defend those cases, my firm and I in particular took on more and more of them. So that's been a large part of my practice for the last 25 years or so. That and municipal liability defense work.
I want to take both of those for a moment and ask you, what are the more memorable malpractice cases that you've had? Was there any egregious act that you kind of pulled back and said, how can somebody do that? Or was there some allegation made of malpractice and you go like, are they kidding? They think that's malpractice?
Well, as far as the latter topic is concerned, there have been some. I can't really reflect on them right now because those are the ones that get knocked out pretty quickly, you know? So,
Do you recall any of the allegations of what the person purportedly did?
gosh, I just can't recall. That
Okay,
right now.
that's all right.
Sorry.
This is one not in the agenda.
Yeah, you caught
but-
me unaware.
But with regards to the first one,
Yeah.
what was probably one of the more egregious, and I don't know what profession, it doesn't really matter. What kind of malpractice were you called upon to defend that you go and your eyebrows go up?
Well, in the lawyer malpractice field, I guess, just the cases involving failure to file timely claims. That's avoidance is a simple matter. And whether you keep a handwritten penciled calendar or the fanciest case management software, it ought not happen. And so I have had several of those, and I think uniformly the lawyers who I've represented have just recognized their errors and felt horrible about it. As we should. If that happens, and it could happen to anybody, obviously. So those, as far as the liability issue, those are impossible to defend. So they've given me some gray hairs over the years.
And in the medical malpractice area?
Oh, one of my egregious cases, I remember, I'll tell you a little war story on this one. I had a physician who failed to recognize in an emergency room setting an intestinal obstruction. It really should have been recognized. And we took the case to trial and defended it on the merits. And the jury concluded, as it should have, that he violated the standard of care. The jury was given, special verdict form, concluded that he violated the standard of care, concluded that his violation did not cause the death of this woman. It was a very, very nice woman, middle-aged woman, tragic case. And so we got him off the hook on that one, and probably should not have. And Judge Kurtz did exactly what he should have done as 13th juror, set that aside. Said there was no way that jury could conclude on the causation issue as they did. Going to have a new trial. At that point, we were able to settle the case, but an egregious case. And, you know, those are the kind that, you know, make you wonder as a lawyer, you know, until he set the verdict aside, it was a very improper result. And I had contributed to you know, to getting that result. It makes you wonder, but you're always doing that as part of a bigger system and a bigger picture.
So true. Did that happen more than one or two times where you had the judge act as a 13th juror and set aside a jury verdict?
I can think of one other case. Represented a real fine Nashville lawyer. You certainly know that you know him personally. If I told you who it was, and he had missed a statute of limitations. He failed to get good service on a general sessions lawsuit that he had filed, a personal injury case, a trip and fall. So general sessions, you know, maximum $25,000 recovery, whatever. He realized his mistake, and so he non-suited it and refiled it in circuit court. And in circuit court, made a $200,000 addendum. When we tried the case, we had to admit fault on his part, admit a violation of standard of care, and argue about the value of the underlying case. Well, it was truly a general sessions case. It should have been, you know, it should have been a $5,000 case or whatever. In trying the case, I put my client on the stand and had him explain all of his qualifications and mea culpa for his mistake. And the jury, you know, directed verdict on liability, so they simply had to decide what the value of the underlying case was. They came back with $100,000. And the judge realized that was an outrageous figure. Said that it was so outrageous that he could not cure it by remediature, so he set it aside. And at that point, then we were able to settle the case. But the point is, or the humor is, that in interviewing several of the jurors and asking how they arrived at that figure, they said, well, you know, Mr. Townsend, you convinced us that your client was such a great lawyer that if he hadn't screwed that case up, we were sure he could have gotten an awful lot of money for her. So be careful what you're trying to convince a jury of.
All right.
They may just buy what you're selling, you know?
Well, how has the professional malpractice area changed since you undertook that?
Well, in the medical field, in the lawyer field, the fact is that, you know, there are more cases being filed. That's the main difference. In the medical field, of course, the legislature has tinkered with all sorts of things and made the lives of plaintiffs' lawyers in medical malpractice cases just virtually unbearable with all the hoops that they have constructed that have to be jumped through before you can even get to the courthouse. So that's the main thing.
And I think you said there were two kind of areas that you wanted. One is the professional liability area, and the other was?
I used to do, I don't do much anymore, but I used to do a lot of municipal liability defense work, primarily police officers.
Has that changed at all? Even in
Yeah.
today's environment, there seem to be so many reports of police misconduct, whether it's justified or not.
Well, I think the big change has been the invention of the phone and camera, you know.
That's a
A
lot.
camera and a phone. Yeah,
Sometimes it changes a lot of people's opinion.
it can, and it can be for the good or the bad. I mean, for the most part, I believe in the job that police officers do, and I believe that for the most part, they act reasonably, and their body cameras tend to substantiate that. And in those cases where they don't, and they step over the line, I think it's a great thing that there's photographic proof of what they have done.
I agree.
Yeah.
While you have been a member of the legal profession, have you also been a member of a lot of the professional organizations?
I I've been a member, but not a terribly active member. Early on in my career, I served as the secretary treasurer for the Nashville Bar Association. And it was a very simple job, Carol, at that time. This was like early 80s, during the time that, who was it? Was it Greenspan was trying to crush inflation and interest rates just went through the roof. So
Amen.
all I had to do was collect dues and then put them into a money market account where they were making 12 or 15%. And I looked like a financial genius running the financial affairs for the association. But I did that. But other than that, I've not been terribly active in bar activities.
But you did chair the circuit court.
I did,
right?
again, early on, yeah.
Not too involved with the Tennessee Bar Association,
No,
is that right?
not been.
What were some of the strong influences? I think we mentioned the 3 lawyers. Were there other individuals who had a big impact on your career?
Well, I'd say in terms of how I practice law, several of the judges that I've practiced before have had a real impact on me. I just, they've caused me to appreciate the job that they do, and they've given me constructive criticism. Jim Swigert, Tom Wiseman, several others. I recall trying a case in front of Wiseman down in Columbia.
And he's a federal judge.
Yeah.
And Judge Swear was state court.
Mhm. Got a bad result, and as we were walking out of the courthouse, we were walking out together, and I made some flippant comment and gave me about a 30-second lecture about.
This is Judge Wiseman. What did he say?
He just said, don't forget that this is serious business. And I was displeased with the jury result. And don't forget the sacrifice that those people have made. I mean, it wasn't a big deal. It was like a 3-day jury trial. He said, but don't forget they took time out of their lives and they have conscientiously tried to do, the best job that they can do. So again, it's what we do in the trial arena is akin to, it is a contest and it's akin to a game, but it's not a game. We have to always keep that in mind.
What was the Bar Association like in the early days when you were?
When I was active.
When you were active, well, just when, as you mentioned, you put the money into a money market account, you're pretty simple tasks there.
Yeah.
What was it like though, with regards to your colleagues?
Well, the not necessarily the Nashville Bar Association as an organization or as an entity, but the bar as a whole was, obviously much smaller organization. I remember when we went over the 2,000 mark for licensed lawyers. I don't know where we are now, but that was like a big thing to get it above the 2,000 mark. And it was, I enjoyed going to the annual picnics and the banquets, and you could always see the people that you knew and feel like most everybody that was there you did know. And it's just gotten beyond that size. That's it's neither good nor bad. It's just a necessary outgrowth of growth.
We've just been through COVID for 2 years where you really are not mixing and mingling with your colleagues or with anybody for that matter.
Yeah.
But at the time that you first started practicing, it seemed to be that the Nashville legal community actually had lots of Christmas parties.
Yeah.
And your firm was one of those that hosted them.
Our building was. Our building.
And I have to say, those are happy memories.
Yes.
And what would it be like around Christmas time with regards to the parties that the law firms put on?
Well, in our case, we were in the Court Square building. Everybody in that building was a lawyer. I mean,
And to tell the audience where your Court Square building was
Yeah.
located.
3rd and James Robertson. The 6-story building, catty-cornered across the street from the courthouse.
With less than a block to the courthouse, right? Okay.
It was owned by a corporation. All of the shareholders in the corporation were lawyers, and they had their offices in the building. So every Christmas, the Court Square Association, that building, would put on a Christmas party. It was renowned for having a great bar and poor hors d'oeuvres. The hors d'oeuvres consisted of a couple of bowls of potato chips stuck out, but the bar made sure that the liquor was free flowing. And if you were a Nashville lawyer, you were invited.
And that, I think, was a very interesting with regards to how the bar interacted with each other, because that did change, did it
Yeah,
not?
yeah,
It would have been customary to invite your clients, but not necessarily other members of the bar.
Yeah.
But those early days, it seemed as though all the lawyers went to everybody else's
Yeah.
Christmas party.
Yeah.
They weren't all on the same day. And so did you do that too?
Oh, yeah.
And you just described your Christmas party. What other law firms do you recall having memorable Christmas parties?
I remember the Ed Harrod's group putting on a real good party. And then I know I should have other memories, but they're a little foggy, maybe I had a little too much partying. No, most all of
Gullet
them.
Sanford.
Harry Lester's group, Gullet Sanford, yeah. Just
And something transpired where that changed. I don't recall what it was, but
well, I think it just became a matter, Carol, of the bar became so big that it was impossible. In the case of the Court Square building, anyway, it just became impossible to do that. I mean, you just couldn't have 500 people, overrunning your party.
what major national events occurred during the time that you've been practicing law that had an impact on the legal profession? You mentioned Watergate. Were there any other civil rights movements, the women's movement, anything that impacted the practice of law in your observation?
Well, I would say probably the women's movement and just the movement of women into the bar is the most substantial development in my career. When I went to law school, out of a class of roughly 180, I think we had 33 women. And that was a dramatic increase over previous years. And now, of course, law schools typically are at least 50-50, lots of times female majorities. We all hear stories of not so long ago about women getting out of law school and being offered jobs as legal secretaries, and that was the only option they had. I'm really, kind of proud that in my firm's history, Mary Schaffner was such a trailblazer. She clerked for Justice Henry. She clerked for Gil Merritt. She came to our firm and became a legitimate, sure enough, trial lawyer. She broke down the all-male barrier of the men's table at Satsuma. I think maybe somebody else had a role to play in that. She was one of the first, if not the first, female members of the Cumberland Club, and so I'm proud to have been associated, however tangentially, with all of that. But I'm sorry. In answer to your question, yeah, the gender composition of the bar is probably the most dramatic change that I have seen.
What impact did technology have on your firm, you, and the practice of law?
Well, it's it's probably a reflection of my personal prejudices. It has had a largely negative impact, in my opinion. I think that the general ability to go overboard with boilerplate, we're all inclined to that as lawyers anyway. Technology just makes it that much easier. If you could send out 20 interrogatories on a written page or in written form, and you can just as easily do 120 by punching a button and do it. Don't give it any thought. Just go ahead and do it. Let it be somebody else's problem. If you can, my experience, you can resolve lots of issues with 1 or 2 or 3 telephone calls, and it takes 15 or 20 emails to accomplish the same thing. Technology has not, to my perception, increased the efficiency of the profession.
You related a little vignette to me about an exchange of emails and trying to reach opposing counsel by phone.
Yeah, I had one incident a few years ago where I had a discovery dispute. It was pretty simple, and so as is my habit, I picked up the phone to try to call my adversary, and left him a voicemail. Didn't get a return call, but got an email. And so I picked up the phone and called him again. Again, didn't get him. Again, left him another voicemail, and didn't get a return call, but got another email. So finally, I replied to the email, chose his method of communication, and said, "I think I have a means to resolve our dispute, and please call me." But he didn't call me. He sent me another email. He said, "How do you propose to resolve our dispute?" So I replied to him by email and said, "If you will call me, I will tell you." And I finally got a return call. And we got the dispute resolved.
So it's the escalation due to email practice that makes it very difficult.
Drives me crazy.
You had mentioned some of these judges that had an influence on you, and you actually recalled a case with Randy Kennedy, maybe?
Kennard?
Kennard, that's what it is, Randy Kennard.
Okay.
And you said it was an auto accident, very simple case.
Yeah.
And you were waiting.
Randy and I had a very simple automobile accident case, and we tried to get it on the docket. We were on standby at that time. The process was just, you could be on standby for like 2 days or whatever, and so we were on standby. And finally, Friday morning, late, at 11 o'clock or so, Judge Swigert told us that he would hear our case if we could try it in the afternoon. And so we swore that we would. We started at 1 o'clock. We picked a 12-person jury. We put on the case, completed it, got the jury charged at 4:30 in the afternoon on a Friday. We were certain that we'd get a result, within half an hour or so. Again, reflective of how, in my opinion, jurors take their job so seriously. This jury came back at 7:30 on Friday night after deliberating for 3 hours in this very simple case. And they gave us a jury verdict, and they awarded Randy's client. They awarded him $7,500, and I had offered $5,000, and he had demanded $10,000. So juries usually do get it right.
And that's reaffirming to know that they generally do get it right.
Yeah.
You had mentioned some lawyers, Bill Leach and Tom Peebles.
Yeah, as examples of people who were fantastic lawyers, total gentlemen, and wonderful people to associate with. Leach, I remember, I had a case with him, and again, in contrast to how it would be handled today, with a bunch of emails and 80 pages of correspondence or whatever. We finished arguing a motion on a Friday morning. He said, why don't you come over to the restaurant, which is in the ground floor of that building where the Commerce Union Bank used to be located. Changes things about every 6 months. Anyway, so he and I sat down while he ate breakfast, and discussed the case and resolved about half of the issues in the case over a 1-hour breakfast. Well, we sat there and had 2 eggs and bacon and smoked 3 cigarettes.
And then there was the time, I think, with John Connor and David Taylor, it was a construction case.
Yeah. And another example, it's a pretty complex case. I'm just sitting in my office and Connors, who, was 10 times the lawyer I'd ever hoped to be, called up and just said, hey, can Taylor and I come over and talk to you about this case? I said, yeah, sure. So they just got up and walked over, sat down in my office, and we just talked about the case for an hour and, again, resolved some issues, talked about settlement, talked about the value, worked out the things that ought to be worked out as one lawyer to another, just the way it ought to be done.
And some of these people that you mentioned, Bill Leach, Tom Peebles,
Connors.
John Connor, were great lawyers, great reputation, but they've all kind of passed on.
They were titans. And the thing is, that's the way they were. You'd have breakfast with them, talk some things out, sit in your office, talk some things out, hash some things out, candidly, honestly with one another. And if you could get something resolved, you did. And if you didn't, then you try the case and you fight tooth and nail and do the very best you could possibly do for your client to advance his causes. But there were no hard feelings and there wasn't any sense of weakness because you had this candid conversation.
In the last 10 years, have you had similar experiences?
Yeah, but it's rarer and rarer. That's my point.
One question has to do with trial strategies and preparation. How would you advise a lawyer today on trial strategies? I think you quoted Carl Warden initially.
Be yourself. I guess that's not so much a strategy thing as it is a psychological effect with your trier of fact. If you're trying to be somebody that you're not, if you're not a person that wears flashy jewelry and is theatrical, etc., then don't try to be that person. Try to be yourself. And part and parcel of that is acknowledge what your weaknesses are. From the very get-go, from your opening statement, even from in a jury case from your voir dire, where you have weaknesses, address them, get them out in front of your trier of fact immediately, and offer, if you have an explanation, offer what the explanation is. If you have an apology, offer the apology, but be candid about it. Don't let your opponent steal the thunder by making a big issue of that which you know to be a weakness. Negate that weakness as best you can by taking the initiative on the issue.
I think you also mentioned asking one question too many.
We've all done it. Did I give you an example?
You didn't give me an example, but I do recall that that's one of those very important lessons that I think almost everybody violates.
Yeah, and I think it was John Branham that told me this. That when he was a young lawyer, he was just firing brimstone and really nailing it on whatever point it was that he had to make, and just hammering and hammering and hammering it, and like taking a witness down to a key point and then going beyond the point and making his point crystal clear. I don't know if you remember Mays Stinson. Mays was
Court officer.
Was Jim Swigger's court officer. Yeah.
Yes.
And I think John told me it was Mays that Reverend Bragg told him, he said, John, you want to leave something for the jury to figure out on their own. You don't have to make everything just perfectly crystal clear. When you get to the point where the deduction is, and the resolution is obvious, you don't have to hammer them over the head.
When you are dealing with professionals, you're defending them. What advice do you have for lawyers in a similar situation? They step into defending a professional with regards to, I call it counseling strategies for your client. What do you tell them?
Well, I always tell them, I am a lawyer. I am not a psychotherapist. I'm not a social worker. I'm not a counselor. And then I go ahead and try to perform all those roles anyway, it seems like. But I do try to say, look, this is a trying process for you. In the case of professionals, this is this is insulting to you. This is the allegations that are being made are insulting to you and what you have tried to build through your education, through your career. You've got to recognize that and not take it personally. And I know that is very difficult to accomplish, but you've got to try to look at it in a vacuum. And I have some clients who, in the case of medical professionals, have realized that's a real problem. And they actually have medical professionals who are available to consult with those individuals who find themselves in that situation. They have difficulty emotionally dealing with the stress of the lawsuit, the allegations, and all that goes along with it. Realizing that the lawyer is a lawyer and is not a therapist. They provide professional cohorts to actually consult with them and bounce ideas off of them. That sort of it's very helpful.
You are talking about how hard it is for in a sense, medical professional to acknowledge when it's not personal that this is happening. But you also mentioned strong personalities. We do have that God syndrome in some of these medical professions. Do these counselors also help deal with that mentality?
Yeah.
How do they do that? Or do you
I don't know because I'm not part of the process. They just.
And when does it happen that you have a conflict with such a strong personality that your relationship is no longer productive? Do you discharge them? Do they discharge you?
I've only had one occasion when that has happened, but it has led to a mutual parting of the ways. But it can happen, I think that it's an ethical issue when a lawyer is so at odds with his client that he feels like his ability to effectively represent the client is being compromised. Withdrawal is appropriate.
When we spoke earlier, we talked about the practice of law as a business, because most of what we've discussed so far is as a profession. So how do you make practicing law a profitable enterprise?
Well, again, I've benefited so much by the people that came before me in my practice. And I'd say Fisher is a primary example. He would not have minded somebody describing him as cheap. And so if you can do something more cheaply, and if your overhead is X and some other lawyer's overhead is 2X, then that goes straight to your bottom line. So carefully monitoring the overhead expenses involved in the practice of law, not engaging in extraneous activities. I know we all have different business models. Ours has always involved no advertising whatsoever. So that's money that we simply don't spend. Client entertainment. We've always taken the attitude that the best way to have satisfied clients is to do satisfied work for them. So we don't spend tons of money throwing parties and entertaining clients. That's our model.
Do you use anything like a web page or have any media out there?
No, and I wouldn't be opposed to that. I think that, that can be a real service. We've just never done it.
I see. With regards to bar activities, you've told me some of what you've done, but what kind of professional accomplishments have come your way?
Well, Carol, I think a lot of these professional accolades have gotten to the point of absurdity. And it was, we've mentioned Tom Peebles a couple of times. It was probably 20 years ago that, all these best lawyer books and all those sorts of lists started getting published. And he showed up on one of them, and he said, I'm reminded of Groucho Marx's old line, I'd never want to be a member of any club that would have me as a member. I don't feel that enthusiastic, but so I've been listed in best lawyer in Tennessee, or whatever that book is that comes out.
Right.
For
And
several
well
years.
deserved, I might say.
I will,
but-
thank you very much. And, at an early time, that may have had some value to it. Now I think it's gotten to the point where people are just,
Well, I
Camp-
think there is
campaign
one
for it.
accolade that is still rather meaningful, and that's the American Academy of Trial Lawyers.
well, the American College of Trial Lawyers. I am a fellow in that organization, and I'm very proud of it. It is a low-key organization. We like to get together a couple times a year and pat each other on the back and kind of tell war stories. To me, it has kind of become a substitute for local bar association activities, because when we have a social get-together, it's limited numbers of people, and it's people that you really know and enjoy their company. It's the college is limited to a membership not to exceed 1% of the licensed lawyers in any one state. You have to have your practice dedicated to trial practice. It can be criminal, civil, whatever. And you have to have a certain number of trials under your belt. You have to have been practicing for 15 years. And it's totally peer reviewed. So it's, interviews of existing fellows in the organization, who in turn go out and interview judges and other lawyers and so forth. And the parameters are quality legal representation, good results, ethical behavior, and collegiality. So I'm proud to have been a
And
fellow
when you
for-
say how many cases, you're talking jury trials.
For the most part, but a trial is a trial. Jury trials get a little more weight, but there are some great trial lawyers whose practice really doesn't lend itself to jury trials for the most part. They go
That's
into
true.
a jury.
That is true.
Yeah.
What impact has the legal profession, your career, had on your family life?
I think it has been predominantly healthy. I haven't had a practice which has required me to spend inordinate amounts of time away from my family, either in travel or in exceptionally, lengthy trials or ordeals, which require extended periods of 12 or 15 or 18 hours of work a day. Any trial lawyer is going to get into those cases occasionally, which are going to consume him for maybe a week, maybe a couple of weeks. But it's fairly rare for me. So I have been able to, I can't think of any children's birthday parties that I've missed because of the practice of law. I've made it to graduations and recitals and all those sorts of things. So I think it's been beneficial.
One of the notes I made is that you tried to make your family a #1 priority.
Yeah.
But again, on hobbies and outside activities, I didn't get much from you.
No, because there's not much there to get. If you make your family your #1 priority, and then you've got a profession that does require concentrated amounts of time. There's not a whole lot for
But it
for
did
outside
sound as though you
activities.
made not only family, but church and school important too.
Well, I try to do a little something now and then,
How would you
Sunday school teacher and those sorts of things.
How long have you been a Sunday school teacher?
Well, I'm not now and haven't been for some time, but when our kids were coming up, Debbie and I were Sunday school teachers, and she's been active at St. George's, much more active than I for a long time.
How would you describe the rewards and advantages of being in a trial practice? Well,
I always put it like this, Carol. It's as a kid growing up, I enjoyed sports. I enjoyed the games. I enjoyed the contests and the notion of winning and losing. And trial practice essentially allows us, I don't want this to sound flippant, but it essentially allows us to play games and make a living doing it. The stakes can be very, very grave, obviously, but it's still that we are in a contest. We do have an adversary. There are rules, and so if you have a personality that is inclined toward those types of things, then you're able to practice a profession that really fits exactly the person that you are, and that's what I feel I've been able to do. I've been truly blessed to do it, and there are a lot of lawyers who have made a lot more money than I have, but I feel like I have been more than fairly compensated for doing that. I've made a very good living doing it.
What are the institutions that you found you could rely upon in practicing law? One of them that you mentioned was independent judiciary.
Yeah, I think it's it's unique. Well, it's not unique. I mean, the British have it. Lots of countries have independent judiciaries, but I think it's especially vital to us, under the separation of powers doctrine, the importance of each branch of government. It is important that the judiciary be afforded the independence that it is entitled to and the respect that it's entitled to. That's one of the things I'm proudest of that the American College does, is it stands up for judicial independence. And when judges are under attack, as some of them have been recently in the past few years, the college will come out with a statement and will take a position that is supportive of judicial independence. I'm very pleased to be a part of an organization that does that.
You also focused a little bit on what role the trial lawyers play in preserving certain rights.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like a tremendous patriot or anything, but I do feel like, my little role in being a part of a system that allows and encourages the resolutions of disputes in a civil manner and under a system of rules is important. I think it's important to the preservation of our ordered society. So I think that every criminal defense lawyer that stands up for a suspect in General Sessions Court, and every solicitor general that stands up in front of the United States Supreme Court and argues a case, we're all playing roles in keeping that system intact. And I feel proud to have been a very small part of it.
What would you say are the hardships and the pitfalls that you've encountered in this practice?
Hardships, although, like I said, it's not often that you really have to make family sacrifices, but occasionally you do, and that's difficult. Pitfalls are caused by judges
and juries.
Well, I always have a greater degree of confidence going before a jury than I do a judge. Judges are only human, and they only have the same biases and inclinations that all of us do, and those can affect how they rule on a motion, how they rule on a case. And my way of thinking, my poorest results as a lawyer have come in non-jury cases. Okay.
I took a few notes of what you told me,
Mhm.
and I think they're worth mentioning.
Okay, so what's going wrong? In other words, well, I'm not optimistic about the future of the profession. I just have to say that candidly. I've kind of alluded to the technology and how I feel about that, and how I think that certain human aspects have been taken away from what we're doing. I hope this is not ominous or predictive. I see lawyers who do what I do becoming rare, if not extinct, in the future. I could see a time where technology just actually rules the type of practice of law that we are involved in. Artificial intelligence, it seems to me, has the capability to just overtake what we do. So much of what we as trial lawyers do involves intuitive feeling and gut, and a sense of how something is going to affect other persons. How's a jury going to react to this? How's a judge going to react to this? That sort of thing. And I can see a time in the future where we just get to the point where, okay, you summarize our case in 4 or 5 pages, and you summarize your defense in 4 or 5 cases, and you feed it into a machine, and some artificial intelligence just gives you a decision. And that's very frightening, but I could see it happening. I could see, we've gotten so enamored of mediation. I could see mediation getting to the point where the mediator, the human mediator, is not necessary. We just have a computer and say, okay, here's the case. They'll give all the pertinent characteristics of the plaintiffs, all the pertinent characteristics of the defendants. Here are the rules of law that are applicable. Okay, tell us what the outcome will be. Like I say, I hope I'm wrong, but I kind of perceive something.
I think your observations and insights are based on what you have experienced over 45 years, and projecting the transition that you're going through now, the last 10 to 15 years of technology, because it's been a major upheaval.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say that you're wrong, because I tend to agree with you. I don't know that we will be the better for it.
Mhm.
I hope we will have a better future than some of what might be predicted. What does the future hold for you right now?
Well, I don't know how long I'm going to continue doing this. I am 70 years old. I've been doing it come October for 45 years. I don't have any desire to go into a mediation role, which is something a lot of lawyers my age do. And I feel after as many years as we've been doing this, we ought to have some skills and talents that we can bring to that. But I simply don't, it's just not appealing to me.
What is appealing to you as you look forward?
Well, as I look forward, more time with my grandchildren is appealing. More time with a book in the study in front of a warm fire. I know that retirement is on the horizon, and I don't have any consuming hobbies. I'm not a hunter or a fisherman or a golfer or anything like that. But I do feel like I'll be able to keep myself occupied and to stay happy even without the practice of law.
Are there any questions that you think I should have asked you that I didn't? Now, this is a good one because you're a good lawyer and you'll think, she didn't ask me this.
Well, I don't know. What have you been trying to get at that you don't feel like you've gotten at?
I think one question I will ask you is, what advice would you have for a lawyer who is in their first 3 or 4 years of practicing? What advice would you give them if they are in a civil practice? I'm not talking about, I think criminal law is going to be with us for a while. Civil law, I think, is where your projection of artificial intelligence plays a big role. I don't know that computers are actually going to decide criminal outcomes. What would you tell that young lawyer?
Well, if somebody wanted to go into the type of practice that I have been in, I would say, look, I'm looking back on 45 years perspective. Candidly, I don't think that 45 years from now, what I do is going to exist. So if you at age 25 or 30 or whatever are interested in getting into this type of law, think long and hard about it. If you want to do it for decades, think about it very carefully. And if you decide to do it, keep your options open of making some sort of career switch. Not a switch out of the practice of law, but a switch into another type of practice. Because I just foresee this area shrinking. I really do. I think I feel blessed to live through kind of a golden age of it. As I said, I feel like I've done better financially than I had any right to expect to, and I've enjoyed it. And I just don't see that happening for decades out into the future.
Darryl, thank you very much. This concludes our interview.
Well, I hope that I haven't concluded on too pessimistic a note, and I will say that it's been a real pleasure and an honor, and I appreciate the opportunity to have done it.
And it has been my honor too.
Okay.
Thank you very much.